Othering Podcast explores the world of marginalized communities with a focus on the disabled and LGBTQ+. In our discussions, we will provide a platform for our guests to advocate and share their stories. By delving deep into their difficulties and successes, we will explore the changes necessary to improve lives everywhere. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Othering Podcast with Mike and Dory.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going, Mike and Dory?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Today we will be talking to Ali Cameron. She is a branding coach, a disability advocate, and the founder of Seated Perspectives. Seated Perspectives helps disabled entrepreneurs build bold, authentic brands that reflect their lived experiences. Her work challenges traditional disability narratives and centers disabled joy, creativity, and leadership.
All good things, of course.
Of course.
So,
Dory's known her for a while on Instagram.
yeah, who's this week, Wasabi?
It's a pleasure to meet you, Ali.
Yeah, likewise. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So, let's kind of dive into, first off, you've been disabled since 15, correct?
Yeah, I was, just 14 actually, but
okay.
about 20 years at this point. Yeah.
And when you when it first happened, were you like an active teenager into sports, and how was that transition from going from sports to being disabled?
Yeah, I mean, I was active. I was never a super sporty person. I was part of school teams and stuff like that, but not a high performing athlete by any means. That said, my accident did happen in a sport activity. We were skiing with my family, and so that I think played a part in me being quite averse to sports after the fact. Mm-hmm. So I haven't really participated in any wheelchair sports or any sort of other activities since then. And it was really interesting because I was injured in Argentina. I grew up in Argentina. That's where my family's based. But then a year after my accident, I went to boarding school in Canada. So pretty big shift.
It's a really big move.
Remarkable now to think that it was just a year after my injury that I went. Kind of baffling. But I was, in Ontario in a small town at a boarding school there. And of course, then suddenly exposed to winter in a very new capacity.
Yep.
And the school would have these yearly ski days. And I was like, okay, day in the chalet, happy to just sit and read or play board games with whoever else isn't skiing. And whenever someone would come up, of course, someone would come up to me and immediately go oh, have you heard about this para skiing program? It was default every year someone came up to me and asked. And I was like, no. And obviously wasn't going to on the spot have a conversation about oh, actually, no, this traumatic thing that happened to me happened when I was skiing. So I really don't want to ski, but I'm not about to tell you that whole story.
For the audience, can you let them know what your injury was? I know it's a spinal injury. Can you go into a little detail about it?
Yeah, of course. It was a spinal cord injury at the T1 level. Okay. So that means I am a paraplegic, sort of right at the borderline. Had it been a little higher, I would definitely be a quadriplegic, and that would have impacted the function of my hands, which my injury didn't. But it was a pretty immediate thing where I was skiing and sort of going down a hill nervously, and then suddenly I was on my back and couldn't move.
That's terrifying.
So
yes.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
Skiing to me is already terrifying.
Yeah.
I can imagine, you're flying down a big hill usually, and it's nothing but white and everything matches, and so I would imagine that alone would be scary, let alone actually getting injured while skiing or trying to have some fun.
Yeah, I had enjoyed it up until that point. If that says anything, I don't know. But it was one of those moments where I went down scared, and I don't know if that impacted how I went down and how I I was moving and my ability to like brake in a way that was safe. Mm-hmm. But But yeah, that's sort of how it happened. And I think that's something that people don't really understand sometimes about like how fragile our bodies really are.
Yeah.
Especially at that age.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, how easily, I mean, I talk about this all the time, is like disability is the one group that you can enter at any point in time. And sometimes all
Exactly.
it takes
Yep.
is like 3 seconds, right? And that's very much my story, in that it took almost nothing. And I think what was remarkable at the time is that like I didn't have a scratch on me, except for like there was a little scratch under my chin from where the helmet came off.
Wow.
But other than that, it was just like there was nothing externally visible.
Wow.
To say that I had been injured, but I was. And I think had I been in North America or somewhere where there had been a bit more research done in terms of like how to mitigate the impact of a spinal cord injury quickly, it might have been a different outcome. But
Yeah.
the reality was I was in Argentina. I was in a fairly remote part of the world in a sort of skiing spot there. So so that didn't happen. It was very much getting transferred to a local hospital first, and then getting airlifted into the capital, into Buenos Aires, which was a fairly significant trip as well.
So going back a little bit, you had mentioned going from Argentina to Canada as a 16-year-old. Is that what you were?
Yeah.
That had
basically.
that had to be terrifying, leaving your family and going off thousands or hundreds of miles away.
Probably
Yeah,
thousands.
I mean,
Thousands.
yes and no. It's a really I mean, if I look back on it, it's actually quite an interesting time, because I was due to go 2 weeks after my injury. Like we were going on a big family trip, because I was like the eldest of my siblings. I'm one of 5. And it was like, okay, this is the first one leaving the country. The rest of my siblings all did the same transition. But the idea of this trip was to do like the skiing trip was like a family gathering before that happened. But then school became like the goalpost once I was in my rehab process. So I was in a rehabilitation center and learning how to do everything again, new little disabled baby. And the goalpost was, we're going to get you to school just a year late. Like, you're only going to miss a year of school. I was still like getting materials sent to me so that I could learn. I remember distinctly like paging through biology notes while I was in like the cafeteria at the rehabilitation center. Which is wild to think, but like, yeah, I remember like vividly the picture, like the drawing of a cell or something, and learning about like the different elements of the cell.
Wow.
Yeah, which is bonkers that's like mixed in with also like lessons of learning how to wheel myself and like how to be most efficient when moving in my wheelchair, and learning how to like wheelie down on like off a curb. Like it's wild.
I would imagine.
That's
yes.
all together, right? But yeah, I mean, so by the time it came to leave Argentina and go to school, and we did a little trial period with my mom at the end of what would have been my grade 9 year. So we went for like a month, and I was staying with my mom. So I already had a sense of what the school was going to be like a little bit. I don't think I could really be prepared for like what the experience of being a newly disabled person in high school was going to be like. But yeah, but by the time I was on my way that September, starting grade 10, it was very much like, okay, I did it. I did what I set out to do. It's going to be this like new experience. The school is sort of helping along, like making it easy enough for me to be there. They had to sort of make some adjustments, and they did. There was at least one person in the faculty and the leadership team that posed some resistance to me coming. But yeah, by the time that September came, it was very much a like, yes, it's scary. Yes, I'm leaving home. Yes, I'm going to be far away. But also, hey, I did it. Like, this is me proving that I can do this, that I can take on these challenges. And when you're a like stubborn 15, 16-year-old like I was, it was very much a feat.
Do you think that kind of played, that I've got to do it on my own, I'm going to a new country, I'm newly disabled, all of that together kind of fueled your, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of like your own internalized ableism in a way? Because you felt like you had to prove something to not only yourself, but your family and the school, saying, see, taking a chance on me was worth it. I can do all of this stuff.
Yeah, you've verbalized it so well. that was very much, I think, what started it all. Like I went into high school into a boarding school, not just a high school, like a boarding school where full of like people who are very privileged in the position of life that they have, and having my own version of that privilege as well. But yeah, I went in there as the only visibly disabled student. The first one they had ever had, clearly, because they had to install a staircase lift. They had to make some construction changes to the boarding house where I lived to make sure there was an accessible bathroom. Like there were things that had to be made, like changes that had to be made in that summer between when, like basically in the time that I decided I was going to go. And so, yeah, so I immediately felt like, oh, okay, this was done because of me. I need to prove, that it was worth it. I need to prove that despite this thing that makes me different, and very glaringly so, and like when you're 15, 16, that's so uncomfortable to be different.
Yes.
So I like dove into being an excellent student. Like that was my thing. I was near as close to the top of the class as I could be, and was always well behaved, and was all like it's almost that like model minority thing, like phrase, but concept, sorry, but yeah, attributed to disability. I was just like, I am gonna excel so that you can't even spend time focusing on my disability because I'm so focused on doing something different, or like you can find other things that are exceptional about me.
And I like it how you touched on that model minority where, because I didn't grow up with a noticeable disability. It turns out I had one. Then, surprise, I find out like at the age of 47, I had one. But it wasn't visible. It wasn't, in your face, but my skin was. And so I kind of had to be that model in a sea of other, students where I was like one of maybe 3 people that were of color. And that is one of the hardest things going through as a student. I can imagine the difficulty of being disabled and just standing out like a sore thumb in a way but yet a good sore thumb. Because seeing you, or, in my case, seeing me, kind of, I guess you could say, forces empathy between people and makes us, oh, well, they're different, but yet they're still like me. They have the same dreams like me. And so do you think that your fellow classmates ever kind of got that feeling? Or do you think it was one of those things where, well, we're 15, 16, 17, and we're too stupid to realize anything?
I don't know. I think it's been interesting because I've been in conversation with some folks now as I've been more vocal about what my experience was then. And I don't know. I think I'm very empathetic to the fact that we were all just kids. And I think there is a reality of like, teenagers are dumb, and teenagers can be cruel, but also they're just kids. Like they also just realize that there's commonality. Oh, okay, we both like this thing. Let's talk about it. Oh, we're sharing space. Oh, that's fine. Oh, yeah, we have the same teacher. Like, oh, did you see that class, or did you see what this person did? Like, there's so much common ground just in conversation that, I think that sort of happened fairly organically. And like, I think I was very fortunate in the fact that, I don't know, it wasn't a school that had a lot of bullying as a problem. So that didn't come up as like a situation for me, which I'm glad of. Yeah. But it's been interesting because, like I said, as I've started talking more about what my experience was like in high school, which was a lot of like me not really having a recourse for, I don't know, asking about how to deal with certain things as they arose. And so I would like, in a very natural instinct, I would hide what I was going through, or I wouldn't chat through it with anyone. I would just sort of like bear the brunt of it, of like unpleasant conversations with my boarding house mother, who was a piece of work, to put it nicely. And it's, and as I've talked about it now, I've had friends and people who I've just sort of lost connection with, but who have reached out just to say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going through that. I feel like I could have done more for you in that instance. And I was just like, no. You were kids. Like, we were all kids. There's no responsibility that you had in that situation to show up for me, because I wasn't even able to show up for myself in that situation. And the reality is that there were adults in that picture who could and should have done more.
Yes.
Who could have done more than just sort of like identified me as someone who was difficult and defensive in some situations, and like at that point, they sort of just put their hands up and didn't really go further and seek out other resources that could have helped me. I mean, this might be TMI, but like obviously as someone with a spinal cord injury, like bladder management is a big part of my experience. And I was a year into my injury, so I was still figuring that out and never really got the resources to do that effectively. So obviously there were accidents and a lot of shame. Like I still carry a shit ton of shame from those years of trying to manage that on my own, and only ever getting like the issue raised as a problem from other people, from the adults that were dealing with me. And I say dealing with me because that's what it felt like they were doing, instead of like, hey, okay, this is clearly a situation. Like, I'm sure this isn't a one-off situation. What are the resources that we can help Ali with? Who can we reach out to? How can we approach this in a way that doesn't make her immediately get defensive? Because if that's her reaction, it probably comes from shame. Like, hey, we deal with teenagers every day. We know what this looks like. And that they never defaulted to that. So yeah, so when I have these conversations with folks, it's like who are teenagers right along with me, I always want to make sure, like, to remind them that I have no blame for them. Like, I don't think that they're to blame at all. I don't think I'm to blame.
No.
Like, it was such a massive thing to be dealing with at age 15, 16, 17.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, I thought I had to carry it all on my own.
I imagine there was a lot of guilt in there as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of shame. And I didn't unpack that for a very long time. So that sort of shaped how I went into university, how I went into my first few years of working as a professional. And it's only been in the last 2-3 years that I've really allowed myself to show compassion for that version of me, for the very newly injured teenager version of me, who deserved a lot more compassion than she got.
A lot more. And it angers me that so many adults were there that should have and could have, even if they don't understand it, because a lot of people don't know everything, and that's expected.
That's why we're here today.
Yeah. And you can't know everything. But the fact that they wouldn't stop and say, you know what, I'm not quite sure what's going on, but how can I help you? Or what do you need me to be able to do for you, so that you could have had a childhood where you felt more confidence. So that, and this goes for, everybody that has had catastrophic, terrifying, or traumatizing incidences where you're a kid and something happens, or even if you're an adult and something happens, and the other adults that are supposed to kind of help guide you, why can't they seem to admit, look, I don't know exactly what's going on, but here's X, Y, and Z. Maybe this will help. Maybe this can help us come up with questions. And I just, like I said, it makes me angry, because even doctors sometimes do it, where they can't admit that they don't know it.
Yeah, I sort of chalk this up to a lack of humility. I think people need a lot more humility when it comes to dealing with situations that they don't actually have the answers to.
Yeah.
And curiosity too, right? Like just asking more questions in a gentle and curious and like genuine way can open so many doors. And that just wasn't there. It was very much like, yep, no, this is a situation that's going to be dealt with this way or not at all. It's like, okay, because it got to the point where I was still trying to figure this out, grade 11, and still like not doing the best job at it. And again, I was 16, so I understand that I wasn't doing the best job at it, and that's okay.
Right.
But it got to a point where my house mother sat me down and threatened me with the fact that no one would want to room with me the next year.
That's not right.
And that I had to sort it out or no one would want to room with me, which was a lie, like a blatant lie.
Yeah.
At least 2 other people who wanted, 3 at least, who wanted to room with me in that next year.
I would have happily roomed with you.
Well, exactly. Thank you. I'm a delight. But yeah, like that's a conversation that still sort of sits somewhere in me and causes and like brings up that shame.
It makes perfect sense as to why it would. And it just, when I first saw your video talking about how they said, if you don't fix your bladder problem, then nobody's going to want to be around you, nobody's going to be your friend and all that stuff, my visceral reaction was complete and utter anger. And hearing it again, I would love to meet that person because it's just, and I think it would heal my inner child too, because so much of that is just, you were a kid. Who says that to a kid?
Yeah.
I don't care if you're on the cusp of adulthood. You're a kid.
Yep. No, exactly. I think it's funny because I've been in therapy now for a couple of years. And when it got to the point of sort of talking about my accident, I realized that the trauma response wasn't really to that day. Like the day of my accident is the day of my accident. It's the day I got injured. Like I don't have a very traumatic attachment to it. It's very sort of matter of fact in my brain as to what happened and how it happened. And this is where we got. The trauma responses are to this woman who like, I don't want to see ever again in my life. Like I can understand that this was a situation that she had never faced before and that might have been difficult, but her response to it was atrocious. And it's fascinating because I almost did see her again. One of my really, really good friends is someone who I met in that boarding house. And a few years ago, I went to Toronto to be at her, organize and be at her bridal shower. And her mom had gotten really excited and was like, oh, I might invite this woman at like our house mother as a surprise for Emma. And I was like,
oh boy.
Oh, okay, sure. And like heart rate going through the roof and like probably had a little mini panic attack that day when that message came through because I was just like, no, like I can't do it, but I have to because like I need to be there for my friend. And it turned out that she had another event that she couldn't miss out on, so she didn't end up coming. And it was just like, oh, like the relief I felt when I found that out was like, oh, okay, like my body, my physical response to it was very clear. Like,
hallelujah, praise the Lord, everybody.
Well, exactly, just everything. Like, thank goodness it was,
Thank the flowers, thank the trees,
everything. Thank the universe. Like, it's been really interesting to sort of learn and unpack that all. How sometimes it's more like the systems we're in and the situations that we meet in terms of how people interact with us and with our disability. That can really be the more traumatic elements of.
We're signed up for your email newsletter, The Seated Talk, and I was reading one from the other day about how you apologize a lot, and that was kind of a part of your grieving, and you talking about the story of your trauma, and back then it makes sense. How are you doing with that, and kind of how did you work through that? Because even I know Dory does that a lot too with her disability, apologizing all the time and feeling like a burden.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. Therapy has been really helpful. There was a moment maybe about a year ago where it was almost exactly a year ago. We moved out of our apartment last year for some renovations, and we were out for 4 months. And we had to find a place to live while we moved out. And so the parameters were the place had to be furnished. It had to be pet friendly. It had to be ideally not too far from where we lived. So already that was like making the circle of available properties quite small. Yeah. But then it had to be accessible. And it had to be accessible enough for me, because we all know that someone claiming that a space is accessible doesn't necessarily mean it's fully accessible. Like that's a word that seems to span a whole bunch of things, and sometimes none at all. Yeah. So in that process of looking for the place, I had taken on that task, like not as in conversation, but I had just taken on that task, like that I was going to look through all the Airbnb listings. I was going to reach out to people. I was going to, look into what other options there were and ask all the questions and set up all the appointments. And that's a lot of labor. And I was talking through it in therapy and talking about how draining it had been, because I was getting all these responses of oh yes, it's accessible, but there's one step in the hallway, or oh no, this building doesn't actually have an elevator even though it was built 2 years ago. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
It's just all of these things and getting all these responses and feeling drained. And I had anticipated that. I knew what that process looked like. And my therapist looked at me and she's like, so wait, you knew what all this would take. You knew how hard this would be. And yet you put yourself in a position where only you dealt with it. You didn't ask your partner for help, your husband for help in this particular situation. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't. No. And she's like, oh, so you're basically putting all your energy into protecting the people around you from having to even deal with any of the labor that it takes to live as a disabled person. And I like burst into tears because that was very, very real. And it was learning that and learning the fact that asking for help can actually be a gift.
Yes.
Because it forges connection and it lets people show up in ways that are really valuable to you. And that's like special. Learning those two things has helped me stop apologizing as much. That's not to say I'm completely healed and done and cured.
Oh, no.
That I'll never
May never
again. No, and that's it's true. It's never going to be. But I found myself in the same spiral a couple of days ago, which I think is the story you referenced from the newsletter. But yeah, it's really easy to default into it. But I think what's special and important now is that I can identify it for what it is.
And that's the first step, is being able to identify, wait a minute, what am I doing? Why am I blocking, your partner, your significant other from being there? Because in my mind, when Mike mentioned that, I have these things where in my head I'm thinking, well, it's not his fault I'm disabled, so I'm an adult and I'm supposed to be taking care of him because, I've also got this stupid notion of I'm older than he is. So
whatever that means.
Right.
It's just like these weird, ridiculous notions in my head where I'm older, I'm supposed to take care of him, and I'm disabled, so I've got to do it by myself because I got to prove not only to myself, but to him that I'm still worthy of being around.
Yeah.
And I think
that's familiar to me too.
And I think that's a huge thing for a lot of us, is that we get so hung up on, our world is so, if you aren't working, if you aren't providing something for me, then your worth is zilch, nada.
Yeah.
So when you go to take a nap because your body's saying, look, idiot, go take a damn nap. And
you're in pain. Stop it.
You feel guilty because it's like, but I'm not supposed to. And I think that's a big part of why we kind of say, I'm sorry, but can you do this with me or help me with this? I hate to bug you. Because we don't have a tendency to feel like we're worthy unless we're making buku bucks and providing some sort of service to everyone else. What about ourselves?
On that note, as a caretaker myself, and you don't need to give too much information about him, but as far as your husband and going into the relationship and stuff, how was that transition, and how did he kind of, best as you can, or at least from your side, how did he manage that? I mean, I would imagine that's a big change, a big shift.
The shift of me starting to
for
stop
both,
apologizing,
for everyone.
I mean, for sure. I think it's been a gradual shift. Like, it hasn't been a massive one, but I think what's been really important is just keeping the communication open always. I'm someone who talks a lot. He's not. So
that's me.
He's just learned to listen to what I say. But I think the fact that, he started therapy around the same time that I did, and maybe a bit later. But what's been really good about that is that I think it's got us to a place where we can both be on the same page when we're communicating, and then I can come and say, like, hey, actually, I'm noticing this, and this is what I'm feeling, and I know that this isn't what you're feeling about it, but this is the story I'm telling myself. Because I think it's probably a bit of a relief for him, because his love language is acts of service. So I think
That's
it's just
good.
given him a chance to show up in different ways.
Yeah.
So it's been a positive shift for sure. I think it's just, it's come from a place of very much, I can communicate more about why I'm feeling what I'm feeling and what's like woken up in me each time I come up against this wall. And he's able to be like, okay, like, I can help by doing this, or like, my schedule is not letting me do this right now, but I can take you there early if you need a drive, or like whatever that might look like. I think it's just given us a space where I can articulate my needs more, and he can then be in a place to be like, yeah, I can do that, versus it being more of me just being exasperated about not being able to do something and him having to come in almost like the savior. It's a different dynamic, which I actually appreciate a lot more. I think it's helped us grow stronger as a couple in that sense.
That's great. And from my end, I met Dory before she was physically disabled, before her injury that caused it. So it was definitely a big shift. I mean, obviously for both of us, but even for me, managing the housework or whatever and kind of having a little bit more on my plate. And it definitely something that took a long time to get used to. And she can still walk some, so I would imagine it's a whole different story.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's interesting because we met when we were 19, so we were still two kids at university.
Yeah.
And I always say, I think the favorite thing for me of our relationship is how we've grown up together. And I think in being that young when we met, and in me already being disabled, there wasn't a like massive shift for him to get used to in that sense, but it was more that I was learning what my independence looked like, and at that time when we met, I was still fiercely determined to be fiercely independent on my own, and I did not need help. But we then, as I've said, it's been a journey for me, and now we've been together, what year is it? 2025. We've been together for almost 15 years. It's 15 years this year, so it's a long time.
Yeah, that's great.
It is. And that's
and we've learned these things together. So I'm always grateful for him, but I think increasingly grateful for our relationship and how there's always been space to evolve and for each of us to grow individually, but also for us to grow together. It's something I think is really special.
I do agree with that. And I also kind of want to touch on the fact that you did find love, which is awesome. And so many people, reading a lot of comments on some people's pages and such, as like, oh, nobody would ever love you. How could you possibly? Because God forbid you're in a chair or you need a crutch. Or I want to pinpoint the fact that we are lovable because we're humans.
Of course.
I mean, just because we may have an extra aid, accessory, doesn't make us any less than somebody who is quote unquote perfectly able-bodied with the perfect flowing hair or whatever it is that is in your list, whether it's written down or not. But and so I kind of want to say that just because you may be disabled, just like me, just like you just be yourself, that right person that's your soulmate, as a best friend and as a significant other, will be right there. And you can find them, and don't believe in the ableism of you're not worthy of anything. And it just kind of warms my heart that you were able to find such a wonderful guy. And the fact that you guys were basically like, childhood sweethearts kind of thing. Mike and I, we've been together for 25 years this year.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes us really old.
We don't need to do the math, it's fine.
And we've been together, we've known each other since I was 20 and he was 17. No, as a disclaimer, I did not touch him until after he was 18. So you can't get me on statutory anything. But being able to grow with somebody
makes a difference.
Makes a huge difference too. And I think it heals a little bit the sense of when I was a teenager, I was battling not only back issues that I didn't realize I had, because it turns out that I have scoliosis, but nobody bothered to tell me this. So I've always had back pain, and I just thought it was just luck of the draw. I got back pain. So I've always had issues with it. And then I've battled mental issues with it too, because in being able to then find someone who is just your level of crazy is awesome. So I really want to, really push that we can all find that right person, whether it's a friend or a lover or whatever it is that you need. And I am also one of those types of people that I give of myself, sometimes maybe a little too much, but if you need me, I'm there. And as someone who grew up disabled, do you feel like you've given a lot of yourself, like more than, say, you might have if you hadn't experienced what you did? Do you think you would have been vastly different? I
honestly don't know. It's interesting because my mom sometimes will bring up this story of how apparently I was a really difficult teenager and that she was about to have a sit down with me and have this really big talk right before I got injured. So saved myself from that. Um, but I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm certain that my disability and being disabled when I was shaped how I showed up in a lot of ways. And I think, like, I see it in my friendships now. Like, I'm a very words of affirmation person. I'm a great listener. I will have the deep conversations with you because that's how I know I can show up. That's a big thing. Like, I know I can't, like, not yet. I can't hop in my car and go and be with you in the moment that you're having your a devastating moment. I can't do that physically, but I will be there. I will be on the phone. I will text. I will write paragraphs long, and I am immediately responsive. And I do think that part of it is a little compensating for what I can't do. But I also know that I care very, very deeply for the people in my circle. I'm a fierce friend. I will be there every time. And I'd like to think that that would still be true. And maybe it wouldn't, and that's okay. That's just another life.
Too, yeah.
Another pathway, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it sort of comes back to that question of, would you change things, right? Like, if you could avoid that hill and not fall and not become disabled, would you? And right now, no, I wouldn't. I have the life I have because I fell that day.
Yeah.
Like, that's true.
That's
I probably
pretty
would
awesome.
have made it's like, I might have made a very different decision when it came to what university I went to. If I hadn't fallen, like, if I weren't disabled at the time, I might have just lived in a different residence, and then I wouldn't have met my husband.
Right.
So, like, or I might have made different friends of high school, because the connection between me and my husband was that a friend from high school was living on another floor in my residence, and that's how we met. Like, she was on the same floor as him. So yeah, I mean, not being disabled, I might have made different friends at school because I would have been in different activities or whatever that might be. And then me and my husband never meet.
Right.
And I don't live in this beautiful city of Vancouver, and I don't have the dogs that I do now, which are like, they have my whole heart. And I'm not doing the work that I'm doing, which fills me with so much joy. So yeah, right now I wouldn't change the journey.
That's really awesome to hear. And I'll admit, as a non-disabled person, it's hard to comprehend how to continue enjoying your life after something so traumatic. And it's great to hear that it's possible.
Yeah, especially for like newly injured people, because sometimes when I first injured my ankle, which led to my CRPS, I at first brushed it off thinking, oh, it's just another sprain, I'll be fine. And then when it never healed, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, I kept focusing on the fact that, well, I mean, of course, you're in pain, so you can't really focus on much of anything else. But it was also a lot of, why me? Why did this happen this way? And I don't mean to sound like, oh, like my leg was about to fall off or something. And I'm not equating my injury with anyone else's, because my injury is mine. But it still led to the same outcome of, I need a wheelchair now because I can't walk very well. Yeah, I can move my legs, but if I could...
It's slow going.
Yeah. If you want to wait a couple of years, I can get there. And I honestly, though, wouldn't really change that, because I think it made me a better person going through that. Everything that I have gone through made me a better person and made me more empathetic and made me realize that there is still light at the end of the tunnel, even if it seems at that moment super dark because of, the pain that you're going through at that moment, or you're hooked up to tubes, or things like that. It's terrifying when something so simple, it seems like tripping or whatever, can lead to such a huge difference. And then you get so focused and hung up on that you can't always see the light. But it's good to get to a point and realize that all of us had that dark spot, and that we will be able to find the joy and the beauty in everything that we went through, because that's how we can then present ourselves to everyone else.
And I think it's also an exercise of holding both. We hold I mean, I often talk about the both end of disability, and I think Rebecca Tausig, who wrote Sitting Pretty, is also someone who talks about this quite a lot. Just the balance of disability is so interesting. Of like, yeah, it can be awful a lot of the time. It can be awful. It can be uncomfortable. It can be painful. It can elicit a lot of shame, as we've talked about, but it can also be really joyful. It can also be beautiful. It's yeah, I get angry so much when people look at me, and I've had this happen recently, and look at me and like, oh, I could never be disabled, or I could never use a wheelchair. And it's just like, well, fuck my life then. But it's just like, oh, that's such a limited black and white way of looking at it, because it's so rich. There's so much potential in what a life can look like when you're disabled. And yeah, and as you said, like, I don't want to equate my experience to what other disabled folks experience, because the experience of disability is so varied, and some people have a much harder time of existing in the world than others do, and that's real. And I don't want to just preach joy for the sake of preaching joy, because I know it's much harder for some people to access it than others, but it can exist in different ways. And I think we need to keep listening to disabled folks and their experiences of joy, so that we can see that disability is way more multifaceted, way more diverse, way more dynamic than people want to see it as.
And you touched on a great point there, because it's the visualization. I mean, when you watch, growing up, when I saw TV and movies, the disabled people were always either some incredible superhero, like Daredevil kind of character, or it was Tiny Tim type of thing, where oh, you got to be super pitiful, and oh, they're gonna die, and oh, tear kind of thing. And I admit, it wasn't because he was disabled, but Tiny Tim pissed me off. Because I just thought, I always felt, even as a little girl, that I felt like he was exploiting people. Like it wasn't a true character, and that there had to been more. But there was never anything seen, because everybody was able-bodied, pretending to be disabled. So even as a young person, I could tell that it wasn't real, more than, of course, it's the TV or movie. Of course, it's not real there too, but I could kind of sense the difference. And then now that we're coming and, have platforms and actually being in movies on Broadway and things like that, it opens the eyes of being able to realize the nuances of the different levels. And it's kind of, I hate to say it this way, but it's refreshing to see real people with real actual issues being forefront, as opposed to, oh, this thing happened to this person and we're supposed to just cry and now we can go on our merry way, because at least I'm not that person. And that's exactly how it came off with Tiny Tim, was that you were supposed to feel, at least I'm not him. And I want people to know that any of us, even if we already are disabled, can become Tiny Tim at any given moment. That we shouldn't be pitied, but we need to be taken care of just like any other person, and that we have needs and wants and ambitions and craziness, and even they need love too. But it's how do you feel being able to see people in wheelchairs or with crutches in cinema?
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about representation and how important it is, and not just representation, but accurate representation. And we're seeing more of it. Slowly but surely, we're seeing more of it. Wicked, of course, is a big example, recent example, not just in the cinema, but on stage as well. They have the first ever actually disabled Nessa on Broadway right now. It's really exciting. And TV shows as well. I think Pulse is a medical drama that's out now that has someone who is authentically disabled as a wheelchair using doctor, which is really exciting. And then the show Sex Education, in their last season, did a beautiful job of including disabled students as well in their representation of a school in the UK. And it brings tears to my eyes every single time, because it's like, I think especially when we're not talking about like highly fictional stories like Wicked is, but when it's in real life, showing real scenarios, showing the things that we come up against, but also showing us as real humans with the same I mean, particularly when it's teenagers, the same angst that any other teenager has. Like, I think it's such a beautiful thing. And yeah, I'm excited to keep seeing it just so that because it's such a sort of tacit, like finger wagging way of educating people about disability. And I think it builds understanding and it builds compassion when it's done right, obviously. And that's the problem of representation that's not done properly, where like stereotypes are perpetuated and that narrative of either disability is tragedy or disability is inspiration gets like put front and center. Then it's like we're probably going one step forward, two steps back a lot of the time. But when it's done right, I keep wanting to scream about it from the rooftops because I'm like telling everyone to watch it. And I'll watch the show even though like for now I've watched a couple of episodes. It's okay. Like it's not the best of television, but like I'm gonna watch someone who's like authentically disabled in the show, because I think it's important.
That's kind of what I want to see is just her. If they could take everybody else out of Pulse and just focus on the disabled doctor, I would be like, I'd be there every time because I don't care about the other ones.
The other was like, whatever, there's a villain, there's a main character.
But it's nice to kind of see different authentic people, and it's not people pretending to be that group. And like having Nessa Rose being played on Broadway and in the movie by an actual wheelchair user, it is thrilling and it's nice, and it's just like they can do things, they can dance, they can sing, they can move. Ooh. And it's amazing. So you get that lovely mix of capitalism, again, going back to you're nothing if you're not, doing X, Y, and Z for me 24 hours a day. And if you don't do that, then of course you're nothing. That ridiculousness. And speaking of which, how do you feel about the rest revolution?
I'm very excited by it. I am a recovering hyperproductive individual. And I mean, I can trip back. I can trace that back very easily to the fact that I grew up in a family that has two parents who are hyperproductive. And like my dad built his business frequently on his own. And he's a farmer in Argentina and runs a pretty significant enterprise. So like go-getter, going all the time, which is great. And I love telling that story because it is such a testament of what hard work can accomplish, but also, whoa, that's a lot for the first child to then carry. And you match that with, again, what we talked about earlier, that need to prove myself. I've always been a very productive worker in that sense, leaning into what I knew how to do and using my brain because that's what I knew how to do. And it's only now that I've been working in my own business, and I've been working for myself for 3 and a bit years now, but it's only really been as I've started leaning into this work with seated perspectives that I've started listening to my body more and giving myself days where I can take a breath and paying more attention to my energy levels and like where I am from a like creativity perspective. Am I more like, okay, am I feeling more like doing admin work, or do I have like the energy in me to write a bunch of emails right now? So I think that goes sort of very much hand in hand with the people who are promoting rest more, is just really being more in tune with your body. And if it so happens that means that you can push more and that you can go and like really lean into hustle culture, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But if you're tired like me, then I think there's a way to do things more sustainably. And that's a big part of what I'm sort of building into my coaching program. And what you see probably in a lot of my content on Instagram now is that I don't believe in hustle culture. I don't believe in having to go all the time and having to like post every day and having to be like producing something all the time. I just don't think it's sustainable, especially for disabled folks. So I'm trying to figure out first with branding, but then I'm like thinking later and into the future, just trying to figure out what the systems look like to help disabled folks build their own things and generate their own income, because ultimately entrepreneurship unfortunately, maybe, depending on how you look at it, is the most accessible form of employment
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
And difficult.
Yeah, and challenging at the
Yeah.
same time, right? So that's why I said it's like, unfortunately, maybe. But if we have systems that are easy to implement, easy to build, that make it more sustainable and achievable and accessible, then I think that's where the win is. So that's what I'm trying to get to eventually, is really sort of have those frameworks in place so that it becomes easy to make that decision versus like it being a highly risky situation.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time here, but before we go, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your business, what you do, and where people can find you. Or
I just hinted at it a little bit, but Seated Perspectives started as a disability advocacy brand, but has shifted into me working with other disabled creators and entrepreneurs to help them either build or refine their brands. And I'm finding that a lot of that starts with understanding what branding is. So there is a bit of an educational element there. But then it's coaching them through crafting something that feels very authentic to them, because I think showing up authentically breaks the rules a little bit of social media right now. And I think that's really what's going to help build stronger connections with the people that you're trying to reach and engage with.
Yep.
So I do that through a coaching program, but I've got other services as well that are just more accessible from a financial point of view, and starting to map out what a community offer membership would look like, and hoping to launch that by June of this year. So stay tuned for that. Really excited to get that up and running. Moving. And I'm primarily on Instagram, so you can find me at seated.perspectives on Instagram, and all my other contact details are there, and my offers as well if you want to take a look at them. But if anyone can send me a DM and ask questions or just have a conversation, I'm highly responsive, as I said earlier.
It's great to have people that are responsive.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to find anymore.
No, exactly. So I mean, I think that's just part of finding ways to really show up in ways that other people aren't, is part of the trick behind what I do, I think. It's just doing things a little differently, but differently to the extent that it still feels very aligned to me.
Yeah, because sometimes when you try to talk to somebody and it's just kind of like a black hole, you don't get anything back. And I love the fact that with you, I can interact with you on Instagram and talk to you, and I get to talk to you in real life now, and hopefully we'll have more conversations between us. And I love the fact that you're there, that you do show up as you say you are. And because it's so easy to get in that trap on Instagram and other social media of showing everybody, oh, look at how perfect I am, and look at how perfect this looks. And you never get to see the real stuff behind it, because and sometimes that's where the real good story is the stuff behind it. And so I like the fact that you kind of point that out. And I have to also thank you, because you made me realize that I don't have to be, I guess you could say, on 24/7, and that I'm allowed to, you know what, my body's telling me, idiot, go, just lie down, stop being stupid, and, internally slapping my face and such, and actually doing it instead of trying to ignore my body and trying to push. And so thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yes.
No, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for asking me, and I'm so glad to be part of this first conversation, and can't wait to see where the podcast goes from here.
And we'll definitely talk to you again, too.
All right, sounds good.
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Please leave a rating for us wherever you listen. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
Othering Podcast is brought to you by Loudcore Productions in conjunction with your support. Your host, Mike and Dory Morris, graphics by Joshua Morris, and join us next week on the Othering Podcast.